Midday in Cold Pine. The heat was so fierce it felt as though it might scorch every stone in the square. The thundering of hooves halted abruptly, and the clink of iron chains cut through the thick, sweltering air. From the dust-shrouded wagon, they dragged her out. Not a gentle bride in white, but a tall Apache woman, her clothes torn, her skin hollowed by hardship, and in her wild, weary eyes, a flicker of stubborn pride. The soldiers lashed her back with their whips, as if she were some captured beast. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Is this her? The bride anyone's brave enough to claim. She's as big as a horse in Apache, strong enough to handle any work. Their laughter was rough and cruel. Children pelted her with stones. Women gasped behind hands, while tipsy men yelled obnoxious bidding prices. From a raised wooden platform, the auctioneer rapped his gavel and barked out, "A bride strong as a bull who's bidding." The Apache woman dropped to one knee, yet she dared to lift her head. Blood seeped at her bound wrists, her face coated in dust, her eyes dark, circled with suffering, and still, there was no plea in her gaze, only a blend of despair and defiant pride. At the fringes of the mob, Emmett stood frozen. A skinny rancher, gaunt and weathered, clutching his tattered hat in calloused hands. This was not the bride he had hoped for when he saw the advertisement yesterday. It was a public execution masquerading as entertainment, and at that moment, Emmett's hand trembled. He understood if he turned and walked away, he would be a coward for the rest of his life. Now I'd ask you, friend, what would you do? Turn your back and walk away? Or purchase her freedom? Let me know in the comments below. Emmett Colton lived just outside Cold Pine, in a rickety wooden shack set on cracked, unforgiving ground. He was neither tall nor strong, unlike the burly cowhands around town. Thin and bowed, he shuffled about with quiet steps. Folks behind his back half mocked, half pitied him, calling him Skinny Colton. 10 years ago, Emmett had a small home. His wife, Mary, died of malaria during a brutal winter, and soon after, his only son passed away too. From that moment on, Emmett buried his heart beside their grave. He lived on autopilot, feeding the horse at dawn, plowing in the fields by day, drowning the nights in cheap whiskey. Day in, day out, he wandered in his solitude until he could no longer remember his own age. To the folks of Cold Pine, Emmett was nothing. Weak, silent, head always bowed when he was mocked. He never brawled in a saloon, never raised his voice in the square. Many said he walked among them like a ghost, nothing but an empty shell. But a few months back, in a drunken impulse, Emmett did something that stunned the town. He paid for an ad in the paper, looking for a mail-order bride. People sneered, calling him foolish. Some said he was just too lonely and chasing a desperate idea. But deep down, Emmett understood he only sought a breath of life for his cold house, a figure to make the long afternoons feel not quite so endless. When he stepped into the square today, no one expected his bride to arrive this way. An Apache woman, large, ragged, dragged out and put on display like livestock. Even fewer expected Emmett the frail and silent one to stand up amid the jeers and face the cruelty head-on. Then, their eyes met through the chaos. A man who had lost everything, and a woman stripped of her dignity. No words passed between them, yet Emmett understood. If he did not reach out now, he would never again find the strength to live. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the wooden platform, into the laughter and the crack of wagons and whips. The marketplace fell silent the moment Emmett stepped onto that wooden platform. The raucous laughter faded away, replaced by startled eyes flicked, not with kindness, but with dismissal. The auctioneer narrowed his eyes, sizing Emmett up as though he had just climbed out of a hole. "You?" he sneered. "Skinny Colton? You planning to redeem her?" Laughter erupted. This time it was sharper, crueler. A farmer slapped his thigh and roared. "Well, look at that." The skinny groom finally found himself a bride. Emmett didn't flinch. He pulled a small pouch of coins from his worn leather pocket and tossed it square onto the platform. The clinking of metal on dry wood was sharper than any whip crack. The auctioneer paused, then curled his lips in a sneer. "Fine, she's yours now, and so is her Apache fate." The soldiers yanked the chain, shoving the Apache woman toward Emmett. Her knees buckled. Her bare, bleeding feet scraped across the platform. The crowd stared, treating her like a spectacle in a foul, cheap play. Emmett reached out and touched the iron shackle still stained with her blood. In that heartbeat, their eyes locked again. Her gaze was as deep as a falling night. Pride and despair mingled in the depths. Not a word of thanks. Not a single plea, just a silence heavier than stone. Emmett lifted the key from the soldier's hand. The shackle fell away with a soft clang. Her wrists, bruised and etched with scars, Seemed as if the chain had become part of her flesh. Emmett hesitated, leaning toward her to offer support, but she shook him off, standing upright with what little pride she could cling to. The crowd laughed again, this time not with contempt, but with mocking malice. Behold the perfect pair, the scrawny shell and the beastly Apache mare. Emmett lowered his head, draping his ragged coat across her shoulders, and gently guided her down from the platform. The laughter followed them out through the market gates. The road back to his ranch lay long and red with dust. Two silhouettes walked side by side in silence, a thin man clutching his worn hat, and a tall, ragged Apache woman wearing his sweaty, smoke-stained coat. No words passed between them, only the rattle of a chain, still clinging to her ankle, a reminder that she had not come today as a bride, but as a human being bought back from a filthy market of shame. The sun bled red as it dipped behind the hills. Their shadows stretched long in the dusty light. No longer buyer and commodity, just two souls, outcasts both, walking the same path. Emmett understood, with quiet clarity, from this moment on, his life would never be the same. Just after one night, all of Cold Pine knew. Emmett Colton had redeemed an Apache bride from the auction block. By afternoon, the townsfolk lined the edge of his ranch like they were attending a fair, each desperate to glimpse the strange spectacle. As Emmett struggled with a stack of firewood, a group of drunken farmers swaggered in, hands on hips, slurring, "Hey there, Skinny Colton, what are you going to do with that Apache mare? She'll kill you in your sleep." Another laughed and spat whiskey onto the dirt. "Or maybe you're too weak to guard yourself, so you had to get a woman twice your size. Ha ha." The crowd jeered as children pelted the fence with stones. Emmett felt his cheeks burn, but he simply bowed his head, gripping his axe with shaking hands. After so long, he had grown used to shame, to silence, but this humiliation unfolded right outside his door. Then the door creaked open. The Apache bride stepped out, still ragged, sweat-matted hair, bare feet stained with blood, but her eyes burned like embers, deep and fierce. She walked forward and stood between Emmett and the mocking mob. Her broad shoulders shielded him. She swept her gaze across the drunken men and spoke in a voice rough as gravel but clear. "Enough." Just two words. No shouting, no threat. Yet the jeering stopped. The men once loud fell silent. One tried to spit a curse, but locked eyes with hers and stopped, face reddening as he turned away. The air hung heavy. The crowd drifted off, muttering, avoiding her gaze. Only the wind sighed through the fence, and Emmett's heart pounded loud in his chest. He looked up and saw the bruised wrist, the bloodied foot still holding firm on the dusty ground. In that instinctive moment, Emmett realized she was no helpless damsel. She had stood in his place, standing up for him when no one else would. His lips moved, but no words came out. She glanced at him, not smiling, not speaking, and retreated through the door. Her tall, torn silhouette vanished on the threshold, leaving Emmett's still heart trembling with a strange warmth filing through shame. For the first time in many years, Emmett didn't feel entirely alone. If the story of Emmett and the Apache bride touched your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more heartfelt Western tales, where broken souls find one another on dusty trails. And if you can, share this video. Sometimes, one brave moment can change a life. Rumors spread through Cold Pine faster than a prairie fire in dry wind. By the next morning, the whole region whispered that Emmett's Apache bride was none other than Chief Whitehawk's daughter, pursued by soldiers all spring. The townsfolk, already inclined to despise Emmett, now hailed him as a common enemy. That night, a pale moon hung in the sky, while darkness shrouded the valley. Emmett sat mending a saddle when he heard the thundering of hooves approaching. Then torches flickered into view like serpents of flame sliding down the hillside. His small cabin trembled in the red glare. Outside, more than a dozen soldiers and inebriated townsfolk congregated in the yard, rifles slung across shoulders. Voices screaming, "Colton, hand over that Apache woman, or we'll burn you both alive." Emmett laid down the saddle and instinctively reached for the old gun that hung on the wall. He hadn't drawn a weapon since the day he lost his wife and son. But seeing the Apache woman standing silently by the window, her ragged frame lit by torchlight, he realized there was no turning back. He stepped outside, into the fiery howl. The wooden house shook under the roar of the mob. Emmett stood straight, gun held steady, his voice calm but carrying in the night wind. "That person inside this home is my guest. If you want in, you'll have to go past me first." A cruel, mocking laughter rose among them, sharp as broken glass. One soldier stepped forward, holding a torch, preparing to throw it through the fence. Suddenly, The Apache woman burst through the door and stood beside Emmett. Her eyes glinted in the flames. In her hand, she gripped a small knife hidden in the folds of her dress. The crowd froze. A worn, ragged woman, yes, but standing there like a warrior. For a breath, silence blanketed the square outside the cabin. Then the soldier snarled, "Fine, you want to die with her." Torches lifted high. Guns snapped into action. The little wooden house stood solitary, an island of defiance in a sea of hatred. And in that moment, Emmett felt something awaken. He was no longer skinny Colton. He was a man standing with a woman, facing the world. The wind howled through the thatched roof, blending with the jeers echoing from the yard. Soldiers and townsfolk sharpened their circle, torches flickering like 100 fiery eyes. Emmett stood rigid, the old rifle trembling in his grip, but his gaze burned with resolve. Beside him, the tall, ragged Apache woman stood proud and fierce, knife still clenched in her hand. One soldier hurled a torch at the fence. Flames roared, consuming it like a predator unleashed. Emmett pressed the trigger. The gun cracked through the night, fire booming. A bullet thudded into the ground before the crowd's feet. Dust spray rising, the mob flinched back. "Take another step," Emmett growled, voice hoarse, "and I'll shoot you straight through the chest." Silence stifled the square. Then a reckless man lunged forward, weapon raised. But the Apache woman reacted first. She pounced, moving like lightning, dropped him with one clean strike. He collapsed. The torch tumbled to the ground. Pandemonium broke loose. Men cursed, others scattered. Her ferocity stunned them short. Who could have guessed that a woman they pitied would defend like a warrior? Emmett stood with her, rifle still raised. The torchlight dimmed, and the mob rattled, spat threats, and lurched away into the darkness, leaving behind a haze of smoke and embers. The flames outside the fence died down. They stood in the yard, heaving breaths rising in the smoky air. Emmett glanced at her. The bruise at her wrist still darkened, but her eyes shone on, unyielding and fearless. But peace would not arrive with daybreak alone. When the first sunray filtered into the valley, the thunder of hooves shattered the dawn. On the distant ridge stood a cavalry, Apache warriors, their lances and bows glinting under the rising sun. At the front rode a gray-haired man, his stature steady, his presence carved from stone, Chief Whitehawk, her father. The people of Cold Pine panicked at the sight. Emmett stood frozen, gazing at the emergence of the warriors. The Apache woman tightened her grip on the knife, and her eyes blinked glassy with emotion. In that moment, everything fell into place. Emmett sensed the real battle was only just beginning. The Apache cavalry lined the ridge above the valley, hundreds of fierce eyes fixing on the little wooden cabin below. Only the thunder of hooves and the howl of wind over sandy dust broke the silence. Chief Whitehawk rode forward, his hair, long and streaked with silver, draped over a face carved with the map of wind and war. He paused before the cabin, his gaze falling upon his daughter still standing tall, ragged but proud, shoulders shielding Emmett behind her. "My daughter!" The chief's voice boomed like distant thunder. "Why do you stand beside this white man?" Silence pressed down like a stone. Emmett swallowed hard, his hand tightening on his rifle, and he knew that with a single command, arrows from that ridge could carve his name into dust. His daughter stepped forward. Her voice was hoarse, but clear, "Because he did not turn away from me. When this whole town wanted to hang me, he cut the rope. When the soldiers came to take my life, he stood with me." The chief's gaze darkened. A tremor pulled at the corner of his mouth. He studied Emmett long, as though trying to see the beat of his soul. Then, voice heavy, "If you fall again, he will pay with his life." Not a sound rose from the horses behind him, no battle cry, no raised weapons. The chief pulled on the reins and turned his mount. Silently, the warriors followed, their hoofbeats retreating like distant thunder across the ridge, leaving the valley in stillness. Emmett exhaled, sweat wet beneath his shirt. He sank down onto the porch steps, hand trembling. The Apache woman stood beside him, her eyes rimmed red but not crying. She whispered softly, "He knows now. I am not alone." Emmett looked at her. In her wild eyes, he glimpsed something new, not the pride born from despair, but something fragile, like dawn breaking. Two souls, once scorned by the world, now sat side by side on a dusty porch. In that quiet, Emmett realized he had never truly died beside his family's grave. His heart still beat steadier than the hoofbeats that had just receded. That evening, the air turned unexpectedly cold. A wind swept across the prairie, carrying the scent of smoldering embers and scorched grass. Emmett sat on the porch steps, the old rifle resting beside his feet, his rough hands lightly trembling. Beside him, the Apache woman, still in her tattered clothes, with broad shoulders and weary eyes, sat silently, staring at the distant horizon. There, the dust of her tribe's riders had finally settled like the aftermath of a distant storm. They sat in quiet for a long moment, broken only by the wind whispering through floorboards and the crackling fire inside the cabin. Then Emmett spoke, his voice low and rough, each word seeming to come from deep inside his chest. "I once thought my life was over, but maybe God didn't grant me the gentle wife I wished for. Instead, he sent me a trial in the shape of an Apache bride, and through her, I learned I was still alive." The Apache woman turned to him. For the first time in that vast stillness, he saw her proud eyes soften just for a moment. No words were exchanged, only a brief nod. In that look, Emmett recognized something he had not felt in 10 years. A flicker of trust. A promise without spoken words. That he no longer had to walk alone. The sky glowed red as the sun dipped beyond the ridge, painting their long shadows across the dusty ground. A gaunt rancher and a tall, ragged Apache woman, two souls cast aside by the world, now sitting side by side, silent, but no longer lonely. Perhaps that's the message of this story. Sometimes we don't receive what we wish for. Instead, we're handed a challenge that seems too heavy to bear. But it's within that challenge that we find family and a true place to call home. And if you've been listening this far, you're like Emmett, familiar with isolation, the sting of sneers, and feeling small before life's weight. So remember this. All it takes is someone willing to stand beside you, and suddenly you have a world to fight for. If this story touched your heart, please hit subscribe channel so you and I can sit by that fire, sharing the untold tales of the West. Because out there, countless lonely souls are waiting to be remembered.